I mean, what a fantastic opportunity to have a sort of a fundamental obligatory course that really looks at these issues of culture and language loss and the consequences of it. I mean, I won't be speaking specifically about the First Nations from around here, although I just met some of the elders. Sometimes I don't know much about it, so I never try to talk about something I don't know about. But the themes will be very much applicable. I mean, we still have a situation in British Columbia, and an area that I am familiar with is the northwest of BC, because I live there, and I live in Tahltan country.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, what I find remarkable still is that you know, when mining initiatives go into those areas, you know, even though there is by law there must be consultation and accommodation, the consequences remain that the Tahltan still are only picking up the crumbs from the table. I mean, they're bigger crumbs than they used to get. But so, for example, when you think of, you know, Eskay Creek, that very profitable silver and gold mine that just finally shut down after 15 years or so of incredible productivity. I mean, literally billions and billions of dollars worth of gold and silver went out of that mine. It was one of the richest mines in the world for a decade. And yet, you know, the total that went to Tahltan, you know, if you in very generous terms, would be $95 million, and that would include every wage for 15 years. I mean, the $95 million sounds like a lot, but that's not money going in to support Tahltan culture or society or infrastructure. I mean, those are the wages of 132 people who worked there out of 300 for 15 years, and it's great they got jobs, and it's great that they got road contracts and they got catering contracts, et cetera, et cetera. But still, in the scheme of things, for a mine that took out billions upon billions of dollars, that's not a huge amount to be diverted to those who, by law, are the legal owners of that land, because they have not been treated with, and the Royal Proclamation demands that they be treated with, and until the treaties are signed, or a treaty is signed, they are technically, and I think literally, historically, the owners of that land. So, you know, even now, Nova Gold's proposal for Galore Creek, again, you know, the Tahltan Central Council signed a deal where they'll receive $1 million a year, which seems like a lot on one level, but then when you realize that the estimates of Nova Gold for that site are that it will produce literally billions and billions and billions of dollars. And when you hear these figures, it's always useful, like $1 million is a stack of $1,000 banknotes about 4 inches high, and $1 billion is a stack of $1,000 banknotes about 248 feet high, but $1 trillion is a stack 67.8 miles high. So like million, billion, trillion is like a whole different level of, you know. And the other thing I find interesting about these mining initiatives, because this is what we're dealing with in Stikine all the time, is that it's just fascinating how in our culture, going back to this idea of sacred geography and how people treat land, you know, it's interesting. What do you need to do to start a mining project in Canada? Well, you get together in Toronto with a few of your mates, play a little golf, cobble together a company with less history than my dog, get online, secure the subsurface rights to a place you've never been, you know, the stories of which you've never heard, the pain of a long winter you've never felt, nor the promise of a bright spring. And as long as you can guarantee the government a flow of revenue, either in the form of taxation or royalties, with the generation of some level of employment, but the employment thing is kind of a bit of a red herring, because of course you're going to generate employment, you're not going to dig the earth yourself, you know. So, you know, but the real thing, the deal with the government really is all about revenue flows. And as long as you can guarantee those flows, you secure the right to transform that landscape forever, by definition. And certainly there's certain, but what's fascinating about it, there's not a metric in the calculus that rationalizes the industrialization of the wild that puts any value whatsoever onto the land left alone, or conversely, puts any cost to the for the rest of the community to the that the destruction of that area implies.
Mm-hmm.
So, in other words, we take that as normal. This is how we rationalize the industrialization of wildlife, but it's completely anomalous. Most cultures don't think that way. And I was just thinking the other day, I came in here Friday night because I spoke at a conference up in Sun Peaks, is it?
Mm-hmm.
And you fly over this open pit copper mine here, and perfectly great spot to put a copper mine. I mean, it's not exactly it's pretty around here. It's a nice desert country, but it's not like it's destroying Lake Louise, and and it sits there, and it's got a relatively small footprint, generates wealth and generates employment. That's exactly where an open pit mine should go.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you put an open pit mine, as they're trying to do where I live, on top of the mountain that is the home of the largest population of stone sheep in the world, that dominates the headwater lake chain, that is an area as beautiful as any place I've ever been on earth, and I go to 40 countries a year.
Mm-hmm.
The same environmental assessment process that allowed this mine to get its permit is what applies to that mine up there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no distinction made between the fact that this is in a piece of not particularly unique. I'm not saying this valley is not pretty. I mean, but it's not like putting that there is not going to destroy this valley.
It's not a World Heritage.
It's not a World Heritage event.
Yeah.
So, but there's no distinction whatsoever made. And as long as the environmental assessment, and all that's generally pretty loosely done, as you know. So and what I try to point is not only is I think that a big mistake for the Canadian people, but it also is kind of interesting to look at the way that we treat landscape. And my experience around the world is that most cultures treat it quite differently. I mean, the ultimate extreme of that I'll talk about a little bit tonight is when you get into Australia and the Aboriginal cultures. And none of this is kind of hippie ethnography or romantic. I'm not saying I'd want to be grow up as an Aboriginal person in Australia, but it is fascinating that for example, when people first went to Australia, the British, the Aboriginal people really offended them because not only did they look weird and have this primitive technology, but what really offended the British is that the Aborigines had no interest whatsoever in improving on their lot, right? And will you guys? Is this okay? I mean, I don't know if you guys are waiting around to do you okay?
Or just wait for you to move your hand forward.
You
got it down now.
About Australia is that, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Is that what offended the British was that they made no effort to improve upon their lot, and that was kind of running against everything the British believed in, right? Optimism. And so they naturally concluded the Aboriginal people weren't really human beings and began to shoot them. I mean, quite literally. And as recently as 1902, it was debated in Parliament as to whether Aboriginal people were humans or not. And but what was really going on was a kind of a devotional philosophy, so subtle that it took academics and academic anthropologists, decades to figure it out, and that was the Dreamtime. And Dreamtime wasn't a dream, as we would think of a dream. It was a kind of a multidimensional, perpetual state of reality in which there was no past, no future, no present, and no word for time. In fact, there was not a word for time, past, present, or future in any one of the 670 dialects and languages of Australia. And what you had basically what happened is the entire continent was divided up into clan territories of different sizes, based on the carrying capacity and the tribal affiliations and everything, and you tended to live within your clan territory and defend it fiercely against adversaries, but linking the clan territories were the song lines, which were the roots walked at the dawn of time when the ancestral beings sang the universe into existence, and all along those trajectories were points of the dreaming, where events happen, but the main thing about the dreaming is it's all about stasis. In other words, the purpose of life was not to improve on anything, but to, in fact, do the opposite. Do the ritual gestures within your clan territory along the line of your dreaming, the dreaming line, that were designed to keep the world exactly as it was at the time of creation. In other words, in a way, it's the most profoundly conservative belief system ever recorded in human history. And it's almost as if you can think of it as if all of European tradition had gone into pruning the shrubs in the Garden of Eden to keep them just like they were when Adam and Eve had that conversation. And so the whole value system in the Aboriginal world is stasis, consistency, constancy, the opposite of improving on anything. And the fascinating thing then is not to say who's right and who's wrong, but to know that the belief systems have consequences. And so, if all of human, I don't know, cultures had followed the path of the Aborigines, we wouldn't have put a man on the moon, but we also wouldn't be talking about global climate change and our capacity to transform the life support systems of the planet. So over the course of 1 million years, which civilization is sustainable? I mean, again, I'm not being romantic. I mean, God knows the initiatory rights of the Aborigines were extreme, to say the least. Do you know what a man had to do, the Walpuri? I mean, your initiation was a progressive flaying of your penis. Beginning from the base of your penis, and with each initiation, you'd be successfully splayed until, by the end, to procreate, you had to hold your finger over your vas deferens just to allow ejaculation. I mean, not something I'd want to endure.
That'll get most audiences squirming.
Let's see how you write down that, Mike.
That's
Doesn't quite translate that way.
So I'm not being romantic.
No.
I'm just saying.
No, as you were saying at the outset.
I'm just saying,
This isn't.
And again, it's like I'm not knocking America or Canada. It's just that let's. But I always sort of gently say to audiences, particularly in the States, like think of it as an anthropologist came to the United States. I really do challenge this sort of idea of American exceptionalism, because it's not. It's wonderful, but it's not uniquely exceptional, and it's got lots of good and lots of bad things. And I mean, if you look at the United States, I mean they consume 2/3 of the world's antipsychotic drugs. They put 400 million tons of toxic waste into their environment every year. They say they love marriage, but half their marriages end in divorce. And cities like Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, is a 27% functional literacy rate. Only 10% of homes have fathers and mothers under the same roof. 70% of African American births are to single mothers.
Nobody doubts it, that the world
we say we love our grandparents in the States. Only 6% of homes have grandparents beneath the same roof. We say we love our kids, but we have this weird slogan, 24/7, implying the complete dedication to the workplace. And that's why the kids are at home by the age of 18, spending 3 years watching video games and TV as they do. So you add to that a system of economic activity that is compromising the natural world, and you have to conclude that the States has many wonderful things, or Canada, but it's not the paragon of humanity's potential. And these other cultures all deserve to have their voices heard at some level. And again, and I just find it so kind of obvious, but
well,
but it's
as an anthropologist, you would have recognized many of these things from the outset, probably.
Yeah. Well, that's probably why I became an anthropologist.
But you've also become a teacher, in effect, to relate these ideas, which is almost at cross purposes.
Yeah, and one of the other thing is anthropology has been so many academic disciplines has been really bad at reaching outside of its own kind of secret society, if you know what I mean. The classic example is right after 9/11, the American Anthropological Association met in Washington, D.C., which is where I live in the wintertime. And here you had 4,000 anthropologists in town in the wake of the biggest event of culture they would ever experience. The whole country clamoring for an answer to the question, why do they hate us? Here was the one profession that could have answered that question in a very sophisticated and presumably helpful way. And yet the entire gathering earned a single line in the Washington Post in the gossip section, the style section, which basically said, the nutcases are here again, And you did literally, it was like a kind of, how that works in newspapers, kind of snide, snappy little, well, the nutcases are here again, at the Billard Hotel, they had to be, and
dismissive.
Totally. Well, yeah. I mean, whimsical like those gossipy things are. Nothing wrong with this, but the silly thing was, who was more remiss, the culture at large, for not actually tapping into the one profession that could have answered that question, or even worse, I think the academic anthropologists, too busy talking to themselves and without the ability to reach out to the public at large, to share their considerable knowledge and wisdom. And I think, that one thing that certainly came out of my academic experience was that because I was so, I had degrees in biology and anthropology, and from the very earliest, I guess it's fair to say Harvard was a real center for the concern about indigenous people because of my professor had founded a group called Cultural Survival, and